This film is based on a true story. The events begin in Boston, Massachusetts, in 1976. Two police officers discuss the arrest of Reverend John Gagan, who is accused of inappropriate conduct towards the son of one of the parishioners. An assistant district attorney arrives, concerned only with keeping the press from finding out about the incident. No official charges will be filed against Father Gagan because the city authorities do not want such a scandal around the church. Next, the events take us to July 2001. The Boston Globe newspaper has hired a new editor-in-chief, Marty Barron, who will start work on Monday. Later, the staff journalists talk to each other about the Spotlight section, which has become one of the main focuses of the publication. No one knows what strategy the new boss will choose, and of course the changes worry everyone. On his day off, the new editor-in-chief Marty Barron met with Walter Robinson, who is usually called Robbie. He is the editor of the Spotlight section, which includes 4 people conducting independent journalistic investigations. Their activities are strictly confidential. Each investigation requires a lot of time, at least several months. Marty knows that it is currently very difficult for print publications to compete with the internet, so staff reductions are inevitable. Marty wants to make the newspaper more responsive to readers' demands. The next morning, newspaper employees asked Robbie about the new editor-in-chief. However, Robbie has not yet had a chance to understand what kind of person Marty is. During the morning meeting, Marty Barron introduced himself to the staff and asked each one to briefly talk about their projects. Recently, Marty read an article about lawyer Mitchell Garabedian, who claimed that Cardinal Bernard Law, the Archbishop of Boston, was aware of John Gagan's inappropriate actions towards young parishioners. In total, about 80 people were affected. All documents are classified, but Marty intends to make an official request. Of course, the church will perceive this as a hostile gesture, but it is the only way to achieve justice. The new editor's intention to conduct an independent investigation into the priest's case stirred up the entire editorial office. Whether they will win this case depends only on the judge. Later, it turned out that the judge would be a woman who is an exemplary Catholic. This could complicate the case. Marty wants the Spotlight section to take its focus away from current projects and concentrate on Gagan's case. Not everyone is happy about this, as the section has always been successful because they had the freedom to choose their own topics. However, Marty has decided to change the current order of things. The editorial staff had to accept it and get to work. They cannot let the Cardinal find out about the investigation. Even at home, the journalists couldn't stop thinking about the upcoming confrontation with the church. Such high-profile scandals had never been made public before, so the investigation is bound to cause a wide resonance. All the Globe employees are working diligently. Marty met with the chief and shared his plans. Obviously, the church will not forgive the publication for this. Besides, it might affect the ratings, since 53% of the newspaper's subscribers are Catholics. Despite everything, Marty received approval from the management. Next week, he has a meeting scheduled with the Cardinal, but he will not mention anything about the investigation. Journalist Mike Resendez went to lawyer Mitchell Garabedian's office to talk to him in person. Meanwhile, Robbie and Sasha Pfeiffer met with Eric McLeish, another lawyer who had dealt with the diocese. The problem is that the statute of limitations for such claims is only 3 years, and the victims usually stayed silent for much longer. The most they could get was a compensation of $20,000. According to Eric McLeish, Mitchell Garabedian actually has no evidence against Cardinal Bernard Law. The lawyer is just inflating his worth to get a good deal. Since Mitchell had been sued multiple times, he was very reluctant to talk. Amid the recent scandals, Mitchell might lose his attorney status. Nevertheless, he allowed Mike to call him tomorrow. The journalists tirelessly work, searching the archives for any incriminating information related to the priest's misconduct. It turns out Gagan was far from the only one facing such accusations. Even during a match, the journalists couldn't stop discussing their project. They were interested in the case of Father Liam Barrett, who had been repeatedly transferred from one parish to another after similar incidents. However, this is not enough to hold the Boston Archdiocese accountable. Later, the journalists gathered for a game of golf, continuing to talk about work. Robbie believes their new editor-in-chief is a smart guy. He's Jewish and unmarried. That's all anyone knows about him. Robbie is sure that Cardinal Law was aware not only of what Gagan was doing but also of Liam Barrett's actions. Every day people come to church to listen to the priest's sermons. But none of them think that the church ministers are just as sinners, or even worse. And the Spotlight team intends to expose them. Even on weekends the journalists work. Many of the staff understand that Marty has little idea of what this will ultimately lead to. Marty met with Cardinal Law, who assured him that he was ready to answer any questions. Moreover, the Cardinal expressed his desire to actively participate in the newspaper's activities. Marty calmly replied that any newspaper performs its functions well only if it operates independently. Before Marty left, the Cardinal presented him with a small gift, a book on Catholicism. The editorial team managed to arrange a meeting with Phil Saviano, one of the victims. He is grateful to the newspaper for raising such a serious issue. Now Phil is ready to provide any assistance to the publication. Moreover, he communicates with other victims of the priests. The church plays a big role in the lives of poor families, making children from such families the most vulnerable. This problem is truly massive, and all threads lead to the Vatican. Clergymen cover for each other worldwide to do whatever they please. Later, Robbie instructed his subordinates to verify everything Phil said and talk to someone else. Mike still hasn't gotten anything from Garabedian, and that's a problem. Mike intended to fix this and went back to Mitchell Garabedian. However, the lawyer does not want publicity in the press, fearing for his professional reputation. To convince Mitchell to cooperate, Mike revealed that he was from the Spotlight section, even though Marty had asked him not to. This made Mitchell change his mind and allow the journalist to talk to some of the victims tomorrow. The very next day Sasha met with Joe, one of the victims, in a cafe. Meanwhile Mike met with Patrick, another victim, and interviewed him in Garabedian's presence. Patrick had a difficult childhood. He and Joe have similar stories. In both cases, the priests took advantage of their vulnerable situations. Sasha wants to know more details. It is important for them to convey the full horror of what happened to the readers. It was hard for Patrick to recall the details. As he talked about it, he seemed to relive those events. At that time he couldn't fight back. Sasha and Joe decided to take a walk because he felt uncomfortable talking about it in the cafe. That priest broke Joe's life. He doesn't drink now, but he used to drink a lot. The memories made Joe cry. Ironically, at that moment they were near a church and a playground. Mike thanked Patrick for his openness. Now Patrick wants only one thing, that what happened to him never happens to anyone else. After some time, Sasha called Joe and asked if he had ever consulted a lawyer. Joe confirmed that he had. The lawyer's name was Eric McLeish. The judge had already scheduled a hearing in 2 weeks. After consulting with Robbie on the phone, Sasha planned to go to the archive and find similar lawsuits against the church that McLeish had been involved in. It was very strange that he hadn't mentioned this during their recent meeting. Robbie wants to expand the investigation. They have already found 4 potential perpetrators among the clergy, but it is estimated that there are 13 in Boston. Mike contacted Richard, another victim that Phil Saviano had set him up with. Richard now works as a psychiatrist and has dedicated himself to researching phenomena like mental disorders among priests. This problem is truly global. The journalist's new task is to track down all 13 priests that Phil mentioned. Priests usually choose a certain type of victim, from poor, dysfunctional families. As it turned out, Richard had repeatedly published his research, but the church discredited him, subjecting him to public harassment. In the archive, the journalists found a lot of data showing that in the 70s and 80s, Boston priests were often temporarily removed from the church supposedly for health reasons. Clearly this was just a pretext to avoid scandals. In the district court archive, Sasha couldn't find any useful information. Later, Sasha and Robbie met with Eric again, asking if he had ever defended priests in court. They mentioned 2 names. Eric said he could not disclose information about his clients, but Sasha and Robbie knew for sure that Eric had once helped at least 2 priests avoid responsibility. Eric explained that often the plaintiffs were satisfied with apologies from the accused and a small monetary compensation. There are no documents in the district court archive because these cases were handled privately. The journalists concluded that this was a criminal conspiracy. The victims signed non-disclosure agreements in exchange for compensation. Thus the church could easily keep its crimes quiet. At a charity reception, Marty met with Pete Conley, who funds some Catholic programs. Pete knows about Marty's recent meeting with the Cardinal but has no idea about the motives. Cardinal Law, by the way, was present. Mike met with the lawyer. He asked about the personal life of the journalist, who obviously works very hard. Mike said he was married. He's not American but Portuguese, though you wouldn't guess from his accent. At the charity reception, some people mentioned that Eric McLeish had long been cooperating with the diocese. Now everyone must decide for themselves. Are they ready to stand on the side of truth or continue to pretend everything is fine? In the office, the journalists discussed all the information they had. It looks suspicious that recently, priests have been changing very quickly. This never happened before. There is unofficial statistics suggesting that 6% of all clergymen practice what Reverend Gagan did. If the statistics are to be believed, there should be 90 such priests in Boston. In that case, there are many victims who for various reasons, have been silent all these years. Robbie and Mike intended to select the files of all the priests who were suddenly removed from the church from the archive. They had a colossal task ahead of them. The journalists spent a lot of time on this. Each document needed to be thoroughly checked without missing anything. This was a full-fledged investigation that ideally should have been conducted by the police. During the investigation, One of the journalists discovered that a potential criminal priest lived almost next door to him. He wrote a warning note for the children. There are 87 priests in Boston alone who could potentially be guilty. Robbie simply cannot believe it, but the numbers don't lie. He is determined to get to the truth at any cost. Sasha and Robbie arrived at Eric McLeish's office without prior arrangement, demanding all information on lawsuits against priests he had ever represented in court. Suddenly Eric stated that several years ago he had already sent a list of names to the Boston Globe. He had 20 lawsuits against priests, but without the support of the press he couldn't prove anything. However, the newspaper wasn't interested. Mike called Richard again, who is sure the church will try to stop them by any means. No one will want publicity. Mike was visited by his colleague, Ben Bradley Jr. Mike's wife is understanding and doesn't interfere with her husband's work. Mike wants to find out exactly who got the list of suspects a few years ago. There is still no concrete evidence that cardinal law covered up for priests involved in inappropriate conduct. If the newspaper publishes an article, it will provoke a huge scandal. Marty believes they should focus not on individual church representatives, but on the institution of the church as a whole and how it protects criminals from charges. After the meeting, Robbie asked Sasha to compile a list of victims. There is an opinion that the newspaper should start publicizing the investigation to save other potential victims. Robbie assured that soon everyone would know everything. Sasha interviewed everyone who had ever suffered from priests. All the families of the victims were pressured by the church, as well as friends and relatives, persuading them to stay silent. The parents of the victims themselves did not want publicity to avoid shame. Sasha even managed to talk to a police officer who stated that everyone, including the higher-ups, was aware of these situations but no one wanted to arrest the priests. Later, Sasha went to the house of Reverend Ronald Paquin and introducing herself, asked him if it was true that many decades ago he had acted inappropriately towards the parishioners' sons. Surprisingly, Reverend Ronald easily admitted it. Moreover, Ronald revealed that he had similar experiences as a child. The conversation was interrupted by Ronald's sister, who chased the journalist away. Soon, the first court hearing took place. Meanwhile, Sasha told the colleagues about her conversation with Reverend Ronald. Sasha would like to meet with him again because he is clearly open to dialogue. In court, the lawyer representing the church's interests stated that the Boston Globe is just trying to stir up a scandal to boost ratings, and Garabedian slander facilitated this. During a break, Mike asked Mitchell how he was doing. Mitchell admitted that he had previously managed to gain access to the archives for which the Boston Globe is now suing the church. Now by law, anyone can request access to these documents. Mike realized what he had to do and immediately ran to the archive to request the relevant documents. Then Mike called Robbie and told him that some of the documents had long been declassified and they were attached to one of Mitchell's lawsuits. It contained everything they needed. On September 11th, the well-known incident occurred. Cardinal Law spoke on television, calling for prayers for all who perished. The journalists closely followed the developments. Mike called Mitchell and asked him to hold the documentation for a couple of weeks because he had to urgently go to Florida. Mitchell couldn't promise anything because the church was watching his every move. 6 weeks had passed since the Twin Towers incident. Phil was very disappointed that the Spotlight investigation into the church had stalled. Sasha promised that they would resume the investigation at the first opportunity, but Phil did not believe her. Mitchell complied with the court order, and now all the documents are publicly available. The Boston Globe must act quickly before competing publications get ahead of them. Sasha found confirmation in the archive of Eric McLeish's words that 20 lawsuits had been filed against priests many years ago. But the case was hushed up. As long as the investigation is stalled, clergymen can continue to act unlawfully with impunity. Many victims of the priests now have families and hide the truth from them. It's easier for them to pretend that nothing happened. Mike didn't get to the archive before closing time. He stayed there until morning to get access to the documents as soon as possible. However, the archive staff denied access, saying the documents were still sealed. Some still believe that the Boston Globe is trying to stir up a scandal for its own benefit, but that is not the case. Robbie has no intention of backing down. Mike managed to gain access to the documents. Since the documents are of a sensitive nature, the archive staff were reluctant to cooperate with the press, believing that publicity in this case would benefit no one. Having obtained copies, Mike caught a taxi. The documents prove that the misconduct of the priests, including Gagan, was no secret to the church, which was only concerned with its reputation. Robbie believes that they still do not have enough evidence, so he does not want to rush things. Mike disagrees, convinced that they should publish the material right now, or else other publications will beat them to it. Robbie reminded him that their goal was to expose the entire system, not individual priests. This led to a conflict between Robbie and Mike, who was very emotionally involved in the investigation, as anyone could have been in the shoes of the victims. At home, Sasha could not concentrate on anything. The husband noticed her condition. That same evening there was a knock on the door. It was Mike, who wanted to talk to his colleague. Mike still thinks Robbie is wrong. Sasha in turn shared that she can no longer go to church. Mike understands her feelings. Robbie met with Pete Conley in a bar. Robbie thinks Pete is here at the request of the cardinal, but Pete denied this. He said that people need the church now more than ever. In Pete's opinion, it is wrong to blame the cardinal for everything because, among other things, he has done a lot of good. Robbie cannot believe what he is hearing. Pete continues to insist that Marty Barron is just making a name for himself with this scandal for the sake of his career. Soon it was revealed that the judge ruled in favor of the plaintiffs. All documents must be declassified. The church has already filed an appeal. The court's decision will not take effect immediately, so access to the documents will appear a little later. Robbie still believes that they should delay publishing the article. He wants to get someone in the church system on their side to get irrefutable evidence. Marty gave the Spotlight team 6 weeks. Even during Christmas, the journalists continued to work diligently. There was little time left before the material was due. Robbie has yet to keep his promise about a reliable source from within the church system. But 8 days before the material was due, he visited the home of his old acquaintance Jim, a lawyer who once helped some priests avoid responsibility. Robbie hoped Jim would want to make amends, but Jim chased him away. However, at the last moment, Jim changed his mind and signed. This brought Robbie relief. There were 6 hours left before the article was published. Upon learning this, the church made it clear that they would not engage in dialogue. This means they definitely have something to hide. Sasha plans to also publish stories about each of the priests against whom real evidence was found. Robbie realizes that they are all partially to blame because they had the opportunity to investigate earlier. It turned out that Eric McLeish had sent the names of 20 priests directly to Robbie, and he didn't even remember it immediately. Marty said that until recently, none of them fully realized the scale of the tragedy, but since then, each of them had done tremendous work. After the workday, Marty and Ben were the last to leave. Marty said that the cardinal had just called him to personally say that he would not be giving any comments. The newspaper went to print. After reading the article, Sasha's religious grandmother felt physically ill. Mike expressed his gratitude to Mitchell, who despite the risk helped them a lot. Mike, like Mitchell, wants to believe that their combined efforts will put an end to the church's misconduct. The Spotlight team fulfilled their duty. Naturally, the article caused a wide public outcry. Hundreds of calls started coming into the newsroom. From now on, victims will no longer remain silent. Then the voiceover tells us the real details of this story. Throughout 2002, the Spotlight team published about 600 reports related to this scandal. In the Boston Archdiocese alone, accusations were made against 249 priests. More than 1,000 people were affected by their actions. In December 2002, Cardinal Law left the Boston Archdiocese. He was transferred to another parish. After the article was published, similar scandals erupted in hundreds of cities. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel not to miss more exciting new products. Also, the authors will be pleased if you leave your opinion in the comments.